I've had that question asked so many times, and it's so hard to answer because, if you have good fortune enough to have been in some decent films along the road, then there are obviously things that stand out about all of them. I think what I remember most about films is the people that I've worked with rather than the film itself, if that makes any sense.
For 6 decades, Sam Elliott has stood as a towering figure in American cinema. The gravel in his voice, the slow, deliberate cadence of his words, and the weathered dignity of a man who lived the values his characters preached made him something rare. A Hollywood cowboy who wasn't acting. He wasn't reading lines about honor, grit, and silence. He was those things. From early westerns to modern dramas, Sam's presence commanded respect without ever raising his voice. But beneath the mustache and cowboy hat was a man who, for years, carried a quiet fury. A personal code that was often tested by an industry he felt betrayed the tradition it claimed to honor. For decades, Sam bit his tongue, refusing to name names, refusing to play the petty politics of Hollywood gossip. Until now, 80 years old, Elliot has stopped holding back. When word leaked about the 6 actors he's quietly blacklisted, it wasn't petty jealousy or bruised ego. It was about principle, about what they did to the craft, to him personally, or to the legacy of the genre he's spent a lifetime protecting. The list begins with a name that surprised no one in Elliott's inner circle, Kevin Costner. On paper, it should have worked. Costner, a staple of modern westerns, seemed like a natural ally for a man like Sam. Behind the scenes, there was no brotherhood. Sam Elliott built his career on authenticity. Every line, every role, earned through a lifetime, lived in saddle leather and dust. He wasn't just playing cowboys, he was one. When he saw Kevin Costner headlining Wyatt Earp and later Yellowstone, Sam wasn't impressed. To him, Costner was a polished, Hollywood-friendly version of a cowboy. Clean boots, perfect hair, gravel voice without the gravel soul. Sam once told a friend, he plays a rancher like it's dress-up, like he's cosplaying something he doesn't truly understand. While Yellowstone drew rave reviews for its gritty drama and sweeping landscapes, Elliot rolled his eyes. It wasn't the West he knew. It was a glossy fantasy for people who'd never smelled cattle at sunrise or dug a fence post by hand. Insiders say he was even offered a cameo on the show, but declined outright, calling it a soap opera with a cowboy hat. For Sam Elliott, westerns were never about scenery, spectacle, or studio polish. They were moral codes disguised as story, quiet tales of men grappling with their own decency in a world that didn't always reward it. The best westerns, in Sam's eyes, weren't about fast draws or barroom brawls. They were about restraint, about a man knowing when to speak, when to act, and when to simply tip his hat and walk away. Elliot believed that within those silences and subtle glances lay the true language of the West, a place where dignity meant more than dominance, and where a single look could speak louder than a monologue. That's why Kevin Costner's brand of modern Western never sat right with him. It wasn't personal, but it felt personal. To Sam, Costner's movies, from Wyatt Earp to Open Range and later Yellowstone, were glossy, calculated versions of a West designed not to challenge audiences, but to charm them. Big-budget productions with flawless costumes, sweeping drone shots, and carefully constructed character arcs tailored for mass-market appeal. It was what Sam would privately call cowboy cosplay. The grit was airbrushed, the moral lines too clean, and the quiet gravity of the old Western heroes replaced with melodramatic speeches and made-for-TV swag. Though the two men never clashed publicly, the tension was no secret on certain sets and in executive suites. Producers who worked with both stars admitted the air grew noticeably colder when their names came up in the same room. One insider recalled a meeting where Elliot was floated as a potential guest star for Yellowstone. Chill between them could freeze a desert, the producer later admitted. Sam, ever the professional, didn't make a scene. He didn't have to. A raised eyebrow, a slight shake of the head, and the conversation was over. To Elliot, accepting a role in Costner's Western world would have felt like signing off on something he fundamentally couldn't stand behind. Because for him, the West wasn't escapism. It was a way of life, built on silence, sacrifice, and the unspoken weight of choices made when no one else was watching. Next, on Sam's unspoken blacklist, Benedict Cumberbatch. In 2021, Elliot stunned fans and colleagues alike when, during a podcast interview, he ripped into The Power of the Dog, the Jane Campion Western drama in which Cumberbatch played a tortured, repressed rancher. There was no sugarcoating. Sam's words hit like a stray bullet in a quiet saloon. Loud, sharp, and impossible to ignore. But it wasn't just the film's pacing or artistic choices that set him off. It was personal. Sam zeroed in on Cumberbatch with a razor-sharp critique, mocking the actor's accent, posture, and what he called a prissy portrayal of a Western rancher. He famously scoffed, "What the hell does this Brit know about the American West?" Social media erupted. Critics branded Elliot a relic, accusing him of gatekeeping and refusing to embrace the evolution of the genre he helped define. But Elliot didn't blink. No apology, no clarifying statement. He stood firm in his saddle. To Sam Elliott, The Power of the Dog wasn't the bold, progressive exploration of masculinity its champions proclaimed it to be. It was, in his view, a fundamental misunderstanding of what the Western genre was built on. Film, directed by Jane Campion and starring Benedict Cumberbatch as a cruel, conflicted rancher, was lauded by critics for its introspective take on repressed masculinity and the toxic behaviors passed down through generations. But to Elliot, it wasn't a Western at all. It was a slow, abstract character study dressed in cowboy boots and dusters, a film made by people who, he felt, neither understood nor respected the soul of the American West. In Sam's eyes, Westerns weren't about broken men wallowing in their torment. They were about quiet strength, moral codes, and the unflinching dignity of men and women who survived an unforgiving land by relying on character over cruelty. He believed The Power of the Dog romanticized weakness and nihilism, mistaking silence for repression rather than restraint. In Elliot's West, silence wasn't a wound. It was a weapon, a reflection of a man who didn't need to boast or explain himself because his actions spoke louder than words ever could. When Sam aired his now famous critique in a podcast interview, calling the film's characters all running around in chaps with no shirts on, and mocking what he saw as its pretentiousness, it sent shockwaves through the industry. The response was swift and polarized. Critics accused Elliot of being out of touch, clinging to an outdated, hyper-masculine ideal of the cowboy. Supporters, meanwhile, hailed him as one of the last men in Hollywood willing to say what many thought, but were too afraid to voice. Benedict Cumberbatch, for his part, never publicly responded. He chose silence over spectacle, understanding perhaps that engaging would only inflame the headlines. Behind closed doors, however, insiders say the critique stung. Studio executives reportedly held private meetings, debating whether to issue a statement condemning Elliot's remarks. In the end, cooler heads prevailed. Nobody wanted to pick a public fight with the man known as Hollywood's last real cowboy, a living relic of a simpler, harder, and, in his mind, nobler era. The next name on Sam's list blindsided many: Ashton Kutcher. Elliot, acting was a sacred craft, not a playground for influencers, tech entrepreneurs, or people chasing clout. Every role, he believed, had to come from someplace real. But when Kutcher shot to stardom through that 70s show, rom-coms, and Silicon Valley ventures, it didn't impress Sam. It irritated him. When the two were cast together in Netflix's The Ranch, Elliot didn't protest. He showed up, learned his lines, delivered the work. But behind the scenes, the tension was obvious. Members said you could feel it in the air. "He's a decent guy," Sam was overheard saying of Kutcher, "no real actor." To Elliot, Kutcher embodied a new Hollywood where follower counts mattered more than resumes, where charm replaced discipline, and superficiality was mistaken for authenticity. The show's audience saw chemistry on screen. Sam saw a facade. In interviews, Kutcher called Elliot a mentor and legend. Privately, Sam muttered to friends, acting like a guy who saw acting on YouTube. It wasn't bitterness. It was standards. Sam wasn't clinging to the past. He was guarding a dying code of craftsmanship, one he feared was vanishing in favor of algorithms and flash. Another name, perhaps even more shocking, Nicolas Cage. Where Elliot prized subtlety and quiet power, Cage built his reputation on unhinged, high-octane eccentricity. To Elliot, the soul of acting lived in restraint, in loaded silences and single words held just long enough to cut deep. Cage, he felt, hijacked scenes with manic energy, turning every frame into a personal stage play. Even when they shared screen time in Ghost Rider, Sam kept his distance. Polite? Yes. Warm? Not even close. In later interviews, Elliot made pointed remarks about actors who turn every scene into a one-man show. And those close to him knew exactly who he meant. More firework than flame, he allegedly told a confidant. To Sam, Cage symbolized a disturbing shift in modern cinema. Chaos over character, shock over story. While Cage won occasional awards and built a cult following for his unpredictability, Sam wasn't buying it. Him, no trophy could redeem hollow theatrics. Perhaps the most painful name on the list, Jeff Bridges. Cut from the same cloth, Sam and Bridges had starred together in The Big Lebowski, a film that became a cult classic. On screen, they were magnetic. Screen, they shared quiet conversations and a mutual respect forged in simplicity. But after Bridges won his Oscar for Crazy Heart, something shifted. Sam noticed the humility fade. Bridges appeared in high-fashion magazines, donned political slogans, and curated press junkets. He became harder to reach, one insider said. To Sam, it wasn't about politics or fame. It was about losing the simplicity, the unspoken bond built on shared values. In a rare interview, Sam remarked, "Some folks change, others just show who they always were." And he believed it was aimed squarely at Bridges. The two quietly drifted, their friendship unraveling not in anger, but in absence. The ache of losing that bond was something Elliot rarely spoke about, but those close to him said it cut deeper than any professional slight. And finally, the name that cemented Sam Elliott's disdain for modern acting excess: Jared Leto. A Hollywood increasingly obsessed with shock value and viral behind-the-scenes stories, few actors embodied that brand of theatrical self-importance quite like Leto. For Sam, it wasn't about talent. Leto could act, no question. But what grated on Elliott's nerves was the circus surrounding every role. The headlines about sending rats to co-stars on Suicide Squad, refusing to answer to his own name for months while filming, sending dead pigs to other actors as method preparation. To Elliot, these weren't signs of commitment or artistic integrity. They were distractions, juvenile stunts dressed up as art. In the world Sam came from, the work spoke for itself. The job was to serve the story, not to hijack it for personal spectacle. He'd seen it before. Actors who needed to make every production about themselves, turning tight-knit casts into tense, miserable sets. Elliot reportedly came close to collaborating with Leto once, attached in the early stages of a Western project that caught his interest because of its lean, character-driven script and a director known for respecting classic genre traditions. But when word reached Sam that Jared Leto had been cast in a lead role, everything changed. No public tantrums, no scathing interviews. Sam simply withdrew. No statement, no press release, just a quiet, decisive walk away. A friend later asked why he dropped out. Elliot's reply was as sharp as a Bowie knife. If he needs that much effort to act, maybe he's in the wrong profession. To Sam, great performances came from honesty, presence, and restraint. Didn't need to send animal carcasses to your castmates to find a character's darkness. You didn't need to hold an entire set hostage to prove your depth. Acting was about disappearing into the role, not turning the process into a headline-grabbing performance all its own. Leto, in Elliot's eyes, represented everything broken about modern Hollywood. More spectacle than substance, more gimmick than grit. And for a man who built his career on dignity, simplicity, and fierce loyalty to the craft, that was unforgivable. At 80 years old, Sam Elliott isn't chasing roles anymore. He's chasing something far rarer in Hollywood: truth. In a town built on illusion, where actors reinvent themselves with each press junket, and every headline is a carefully curated narrative, Elliott remains stubbornly, defiantly himself. He's not interested in applause, awards, or Twitter trends. The roles he takes now aren't chosen for marketability or award season buzz. They're chosen because they mean something to him, because they honor a tradition of storytelling that's rapidly fading in a world obsessed with instant gratification and hollow spectacle. Sam Elliott has built his entire life around a code of quiet dignity, a belief that the measure of a man isn't found in how loudly he shouts, but in how faithfully he stands his ground when no one's looking. Elliot, the West, both the one he's roamed in films and the one etched into his bones, has never been about bluster. It's about resilience, restraint, and the unspoken bond between people who know that out there, in the unforgiving expanse of open land and hard living, your word is your bond, and your actions write your character. That's why, in a Hollywood landscape increasingly driven by shock value and manufactured scandal, Sam's quiet defiance feels almost rebellious. He isn't interested in calling out names for headlines or engaging in petty feuds for social media fodder. When he decides a man's betrayed the craft or insulted the traditions he holds sacred, he simply writes them off with a public smear, but with a private, permanent silence. Those who know Elliot well say it's this integrity that's made him both a legend and an outsider. Worked with countless Hollywood giants, but kept his inner circle tight. He's been offered blockbuster franchises, superhero roles, and prestige projects he politely declined, refusing to dilute his legacy for a paycheck. His ranch in Malibu, miles away from the glare of Beverly Hills, is where you'll find him these days, writing, reading, and working on projects that still whisper to something honest inside him. In an industry where reinvention is currency, Sam Elliott's refusal to become anything other than exactly who he is may be his greatest and most enduring act of defiance.